In this lesson, we're going to cover section 7.1 and hopefully just to briefly talk about a couple new concepts in 7.1 so we don't have to do the whole chapter. I'm going to go over graphing horizontal and vertical lines, which should be a review, but make sure that you guys understand those concepts. And then we're just going to talk about midpoint formula and just kind of reiterate whether lines are perpendicular or parallel or neither and how to figure that out. So let's kind of review graphing vertical and horizontal lines. So let's look at the first one. It's y equals 3. And you can see there's a lot of stuff missing there because we're normally used to seeing it in y equals mx plus b form. And you can see there's no x's in there. And so what this says is that on the graph that y always has to be 3. So if I plug in any number or any point, then I would know that y always has to be 3. So if I plug in 0, my one point would be 0, 3. So let's graph that, 0, 3. Off a little bit there. And then let's say we use 1. And it has to be a 3. No matter what the x value is, y always has to be 3. So 1, 3. I could plug in 2, and no matter, y has to be 3. So 2, 3. And you can see that this will be my horizontal line. Horizontal lines have 0 slope, which is very different than a vertical line. So let's look at one that has just x's in them. So if I was to solve for x here, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. I get x is negative 2. That tells me that I don't care what y is, x always has to be negative 2. So if I draw my little t-chart, x always has to be negative 2. So in here, x always has to be negative 2. My pen's not quite sinking here. So I can put in 0, 1, 2. I can put in any number for y, but x always has to be 0. So 0, negative 2, 1, negative 2, 2, negative 2. So I can draw my vertical line. So it's easy to remember this, so you don't get confused. If you just do your t-chart and plug in values, plug in x is negative 2 in all cases, and then plug in numbers for y. So vertical lines have no slope, or the slope is undefined. So that's the confusing part about those, and I'm not sure if you got that out of 3.3, but I wanted to review that. So another concept that's kind of new is the midpoint formula, and it's an easy application. And so what you're doing on the graph is you're trying to find the point that's in the middle between two lines, or the middle between 2 points. So if I knew that this was 1 and this is 10, how do I get the point in the middle? You take the average. You say 1 plus 10 is 11. You divide by 2, which is 5.5. The middle would be 5.5, the midpoint. So it's the same thing, except we have to average the x's and we have to average the y's. So here's our formula. We add the x's, we divide by 2. We add the y's and we divide by 2, and that gives us our xy point. And the midpoint will always be a point, so it has to be in point form. So let's look at an example. So I'm given the point P, which is negative 5, 8. I'm given the point Q, which is 2, 4. So let's find the midpoint. So I'm going to take the x's, which is -5 plus 2, divided by 2. That's going to give me my x value. I'm going to take my y's, which is 8 plus 4 divided by 2. And that should give me my y value that's in the middle of those 2 points on the graph. And you can kind of estimate it. You can draw a graph, put those 2 points on there, and see if you can kind of figure out, but this is an exact way, and it's just an average. And again, this is one of those that are going to be on all the tests. So make a note card of the formula. This is a midpoint formula. All right, so let's do the math. So -2 plus 5 is -3 over 2. 8 plus 4 is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So you can leave it like that, or you can change this to a decimal, which is -1.5 and 6, and this would be your midpoint. Okay, the last concept that I want to go over is determining whether lines are perpendicular, parallel, or whether they're neither. So for lines to be parallel, or an equal distance apart in space forever, they have to have the same slope. So the slopes have to be identical. For lines that meet at a point, and we talk about perpendiculars, that they actually meet at right angles. You remember that back from way back in high school. They have to meet at right angles. You can tell that these would have to have some kind of opposite slopes. This is a positive sloping line. This is a negative sloping line. So you know that their slopes have to have opposite signs. And their slopes have to be reciprocals. So in this case here, you get one that's a -1/2 and one that's a 2. Reciprocals. What's a reciprocal? So 3 and 1/3 are reciprocals, but for them to be perpendicular, one of these has to be negative. Another reciprocal, 2/3. A reciprocal, all we do is flip it, so it's 3/2. For them to be perpendicular, they have to have opposite signs. So for them to be perpendicular, we would have 3 and -1/3 for an example, or -3 and 1/3. Here, one of these would have to be negative, either -2/3 and 3/2, or 2/3 and -3/2. So we have to look at the slope of the lines to see whether they're perpendicular or parallel. For them to be neither, three and 1/3 would be neither, because they are reciprocals, but neither one of them are opposite signs. So that would be neither. Another case, 2/3 and 3/2. These are reciprocals, but they don't have opposite signs. So let's try one. Determine whether these lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So this is really nice. We know that these numbers are our slope, because this is in y equals mx plus b form. So we know that's a slope. I'll have a slope of 4 and a slope of 1/4. They're not the same. We know they're not parallel. For them to be perpendicular, one of them has to be negative. So this one is neither. So for them to be parallel, they have to be exactly the same. To be perpendicular, they have to be reciprocals, and one has to be a negative. If they don't satisfy either one of those criteria, we say that they are neither. On the graph, they will eventually meet at some point, but not necessarily at a perpendicular angle. Okay, let's look at another one. Are these lines perpendicular? Well, these are not written in y equals mx plus b. I can't see the slope. So you have to put them in y equals mx plus b form so you can see the slope. So let's do the first one. 3x plus 5y equals 6. I'm trying to solve for y, and then it will be in mx plus b form. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides, and I'm going to put it in the front on the other side so it gets to that nice form that I like. I'm going to divide everything by 5. So y equals negative 3/5 x plus 6/5. And we typically don't change our intercept to a decimal. We leave everything in fraction form when we talk about slope-intercept form. Okay, let's do the next one. 5x minus 3y equals 2. Again, we're going to be solving for y. It puts that in a form for us. So I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides, and I'm going to put it in the front. As long as my 2 remains positive, I'm okay. And now I'm going to divide everything by negative 3. So I get y equals a negative divided by a negative is 5/3. A positive divided by a negative is a negative 2/3. And I don't really care what my intercepts are. I'm just looking right at the slope. Well, they're definitely not parallel because they're not exactly the same. Are they perpendicular? Well, they're reciprocals. One's 3/5 and one's 5/3, and one of them's a negative. Therefore, they are perpendicular. Okay, let's look at another one. Determine whether these are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Again, we need these in y equals mx plus b form so we can look at the slope. So I'm going to do the first one. 4x minus y equals 2. I'm trying to get a positive y by itself. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. And again, I'm going to put it in the front. So it'll be in the nice form when I get done. Now, this is a negative, so I need to get rid of the negative. So I'm going to divide everything by negative 1. Y equals negative divided by negative is a positive. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. Now I have my slope. So let's do this one. X minus 4y equals negative 8. Again, I'm trying to get y by itself. So I'm going to subtract x. Again, I'm going to put it in the front. I'm going to divide each side by negative 4. So this makes 1. This is what I want. Y equals a negative divided by a negative is a positive, and there's really a pretend 1 there, remember? So I'm going to write that as 1/4 x. A negative divided by a negative is a positive 2. So now let's look at the slopes. This is just like the one before. These are reciprocals. They're not identical, so they're not parallel. These are reciprocals, but they're both positive. So they are neither parallel nor perpendicular, so they are neither. Thank you, and if you got any questions, let me know.